Hello, welcome to my presentation. My name is Mónica Fernández and I come from Universidad de Valladolid, where I work as a postdoctoral FPU fellow. Before beginning my presentation, I would like to thank the organizers for organizing a conference with such an interesting topic that I've been for a while fascinated about. So without further ado, let me share my presentation. My presentation is titled Literature of the Capitalocene, the Coloniality of Climate in Edwidge Danticat's Clare of the Sea Light. The aftermath of the 2010 earthquake in Haiti imprinted an image of the global connections across the American hemisphere, with the United States organizing, in Mimi Scheller's words, the entire post-earthquake recovery project involving foreign government organizations, neo-governmental humanitarian aid organizations, missionaries, researchers, engineers, building company, and many kinds of zealous volunteers. End of quote. At the same time, a parallel act was taking place, which was that the Port-au-Prince airport was placed under United States control in order to prevent the affected Haitians from reaching the continent's shores in order to reunify with family. In our contemporary world, as colonial governance became replaced with foreign investment in what constitutes the era of multinational capitalism, national borders have been reinforced in order to protect the international division of labor that characterizes this kind of capitalism. Therefore, we could imagine that precisely Haitian creative responses may teach us how to articulate a future not based on modern colonial imaginaries and ideologies. Given the critique to the nation state as a failed project, post-colonial scholar Bill Ashcroft contends what to do with the aspirations of people who have no hope of creating one. Modern Haitian literature has often been identified as the key to explore the future, it being the oldest decolonized-like nation in the world, but also one that, also in Scheller's words, has especially suffered from unimposed isolation and the expulsion from the international community, producing a state of exception that left it vulnerable to extra-state projects. There have been up to now two main strategies for imagining Haiti's political life after the Haitian Revolution in 1804. We have first the idea of an isolated pastoral heaven, as the negritude representative Jean-Price Mars and later the dictator François Duvalier did. On the other hand, Haiti has been seen as an appendix of the former metropolis France, as was the case with the post-revolutionary elite. This doesn't leave a lot of satisfactory options, in my opinion. Haiti needs to be seen as part of something larger, be it the island of Hispaniola, the Caribbean archipelago, or the American hemisphere. Michael Dash, in fact, describes Haitians as liminal citizens of the hemisphere transformed by United States imperialism, and dismisses both Africa and the state as a resource of identification for the Haitian people. This is perhaps why Edwidge Danticat, a Haitian American residing in the United States who writes in English, this is why she has been considered by some the national writer of Haiti. A lot of people believe she captures the idiosyncrasy of this country, population, area in a particularly accurate way. This link that I am including here at the end of the presentation, I encourage you to take a look at it. I won't have time now. It's about an article in the cultural section of the Spanish journal El País, which has a beautiful map of the world drawn by a user of the popular forum Reddit. And it takes notice that each country, it gives representative novel for each country. And Edwidge Danticat was the representative of Haiti, as was the case of the Dominican Republic, Junot Diaz, another immigrant writing in a foreign language. Edwidge Danticat's last novel, Claire of the Sea Light, relates the disappearance of a 7-year-old girl, Claire Linier-Lanmé, after she finds out that her father, Notsias Faustin, a fisherman, is going to give her away to the town's fabric vendor, Madame Gael, because he believes he cannot provide her a good upbringing and that he might someday die at sea while fishing. Although it is not explicitly mentioned, migrating to the United States is something that could be in Nosius's mind, or at least in Claire's, as she seems to denote when she claims that she wonders all the time where he was chercher la vie, looking for a better life, when he goes to another part of the sea, someplace where she could not spot his boat. End of quote. After the disappearance, Claire does not appear in the novel again until the very end, as if the narrator was looking for her throughout the town of Ville Rose and the contiguous neighborhood of Cité-Pendu. The rest of the chapters revolve around the struggles and memories of the different inhabitants of these places, who share a net of unacknowledged connections. The possibility to abandon these places, the intended destination of being the United States, is ever present throughout the narrative in the minds of several of the characters, as a goal or even as something that has already happened. However, the narrative, despite the seeming drive to drift towards this country, is always brought back to the insular community, as if propelled by the tidal force of the Caribbean Sea. Though it was written after the occurrence of the natural disaster, Danticat chooses to set her novel in 2009, just before the earthquake, in order to, in her own words, hang on to something that was, portraying the essence of the human relationships that sustain the community depicted, and thus providing a clue on the values that might help to deal with the crisis. However, there already are signs of natural degradation throughout the novel that might imperil the life of this community, such as the extinction of an animal species, or the houses that I am quoting from the book were dragged downstream year after year in flash floods because the rivers were swelling in response to the lack of trees, the land erosion, the dying topsoil. End of quote. The novel then also depicts the relationship that humans have with nature, as well as the effect they have on it. It could be classed as a novel containing the poetics of the Anthropocene, a 21st century concept that describes our current geological epoch, characteristically affected by human activity to the point that it constitutes its only determining force. The chapter titled The Frogs retrospectively narrates the birth of Gael's own daughter, who in the narrative present is dead, as she is the victim of a motorbike accident. Apart from Gael's own pregnancy, the narration of this chapter focuses on the extinction of the town's frogs. Climate change acts as a framework for this chapter, where the frogs arguably die because of the rise in the temperatures. I'm quoting from the book now. It was so hot in Ville Rose that year that dozens of frogs exploded, end of quote. This phenomenon is probably the most quoted sign exemplifying the effect of human activity on the environment. While the Anthropocene is popularly still tied to anthropogenic climate change, the term also covers processes such as ocean acidification, which is a consequence of the increasing carbon dioxide levels, global population growth, resource depletion, massive species extinction, and ecosystem simplification more generally. Cumulatively, these phenomena point to the unsustainability of the human exploitation of the planet. Unlike other instances of adaptation, this is not the natural cycle that Gael is fooled into inferring from the event. She thinks, and I'm quoting, that a normal cycle was occurring, that young was replacing old, and life replacing death, sometimes slowly, sometimes quickly, just as it was for everything else. End of quote. Just like the premature death of her daughter, which is predicted with this paragraph, the phenomenon is not to be expected within a healthy course of events. Instead, a whole animal species does not have the time to adapt to the increase in temperature and hence dies. Episodes like Giles' daughter's death point out that while some tragic events like death and suffering might make us equal, these occur by pure chance, and the suffering of the poor responds to factors easily identifiable. One example is the sinking of the houses in Ville Rose due to the swelling of the rivers when the rain is intense. This is not only due to the rain being too heavy, but also because of deforestation. Deforestation has historically caused erosion in Haitian lands, and it's a result of colonial but also neo-colonial enterprises in the land, on the island. In the chapters describing the effects of these rains, Gael points out that, and I'm quoting, hers and Laurent's was now the only house so close to the rivers. The other houses, newer yet shabbier, had been dragged downstream year after year in flash floods. With the term unnatural disaster, let me go on. Yeah. Mimi Scheller highlights the complicities between power and the effects of disaster. And this quote on the slides, I'm going to read it. Like many unnatural disasters before and since, the 12th January 2010, the earthquake in Haiti brought to light the highly uneven interdependence and fragility of the complex mobility systems and infrastructural moorings that create the possibility for people to weave together everyday life. During the earthquake, it is estimated that somewhere between 160,000 and 220,000 people perished in collapsing buildings. Another 300,000 people received injuries to various degrees, and a further 1.5 million were made homeless. End of quote. Though Danticat's novel is set before the earthquake, in direct reference to it, or the effects it will have, is constant, despite the liberal dictum that has made a renewed appearance during the COVID-19 crisis, stating that human beings are all equal in the face of health and natural crisis. Naomi Klein, in her famous book Shock Doctrine, contends that disasters do not only unveil inequity, they also increase it. Within this neoliberal pattern, much of the public infrastructure is given to private companies in the aftermath stages, as was the case with the water supply in Haiti, where these companies were also foreign. The inequity exposed by privately owned foreign handling of natural resources in Haiti has led me to the conclusion that the term Anthropocene was perhaps too neutral, or that the argument behind was too simple. Oops. Sorry, thought there was another slide. Capitalocene, you can see the term written on this one in contrast, not only highlights the destructive and accelerating logics of resource depletion and petrochemical dependency within capitalism as a world system, but also that the development of the processes that have heavily affected the climate depended on colonial relations that have made the profitability of technologies such as steam energy possible. Capitalocene better reflects the situations that Klein and Scheller put forth. Erosion has been a consistent problem in the Caribbean since the colonizers mistook diversity for fertility when they arrived. It is a reminder of the colonial past. Maxime L. Montgomery underscores Clare's ability to utilize legend and law from the past in charting a hopeful future in the novel. Silvia Martinez Alquina describes Danticat's work as an articulation of narratives of memorialization, resilience, and hope, whereas Christina Gibby highlights the role of the unidealized and sometimes cruel portrayal of nature in the novel as a framework for a narrative of hope, communion, and belonging. Thus, the novel finishes when Max Jr., a resident in Cité Pendu, recently returned from the United States, tries to commit suicide and the unbearable guilt of having raped his mate in the past. And he, and I'm quoting Martinez Falkina, is returned from the sea and welcomed by the community, the poor and the rich, attending to him together. The resolution points to these small moments that provide the possibility of emotional and material healing when all the members of the community share their resources, rather than on a neoliberal tale of ragged riches in another country. The narrative rather wonders what would happen if the forgotten fisherman, qua at the bottom of the social hierarchy of Ville Rose, but at the same time an integral part of the Caribbean labor identity, were provided with a bigger boat where the crazy waves would not get them. This is a phrase that appears in the book. What if the resources that are needed by the islanders were kept rather than being exported with all the rest, enriching the island's elite but impoverishing the lowest classes? This discourse emphasizes Haitian resilience, but also the need for its global participation in equal terms. As Danticat put it in an interview, talking about the possibility for resilience in small countries, the town is the hero, where you get to see the mayor, who is also the undertaker. But there is also a lot to be done. She insists on showing this aspect of human organization in Haiti that she contends is not talked or heard about. This is why, rather than engaging in tales of upward mobility like many migrant writers have done, Danticat pays attention to the island, pointing to the fact that regardless of how many narratives of migration are created, the Caribbean is still in existence and demands our attention. The vision of hope that pervades the novel acknowledges the oppressed situation of Haiti, and it is based on a criticism of the status quo and the Haitian demand for a voice and opinion within the international system. So thank you very much for listening. This is my personal data. In case you want to drop me a message, if you want more information about any of the topics I presented. And to sum up, thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this wonderful conference. And I hope you have enjoyed my talk.